The security monitors kept showing someone standing at the end of the surgical wing. Every time I walked down there, the hallway was empty. But the cameras never stopped detecting movement. Most hospital guards get used to silence after midnight. The fluorescent lights, the empty elevators, the sound of distant machines. But some floors feel wrong long before anything happens. Tonight's stories come from hospital security guards who realized certain patients never really checked out. I started working hospital security during the winter of 2019 at a private hospital outside Indianapolis. Most night shifts were boring. Nurses arguing over paperwork, visitors trying to sneak into restricted floors, drunk patients yelling in the eye. After a while, you stop noticing the strange sounds hospitals make at night. But the fourth floor always felt different after midnight. That floor had long recovery rooms for post-surgery patients. During the day, it looked normal enough, but at night the entire hallway turned quiet in a way I still can't explain. The lights were dimmer than the rest of the building, and the air always felt colder near the nurse's station. My shift usually started at 11. Around 2 in the morning, I'd do another walk through the surgical wing before sitting back down in the security office. The cameras on that floor were old and constantly glitching. Motion alerts went off for empty hallways all the time. At least that's what everyone told me. One Thursday night, the motion detector for Hall C triggered 3 times in less than 10 minutes. I remember being annoyed because I'd already checked the area twice. The monitors showed nothing except the empty corridor outside room 214. Still, protocol said I had to respond. The hallway was silent when I got upstairs. No nurses talking. No TVs running inside the rooms. Just fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and the sound of an oxygen machine somewhere farther down the wing. I checked the doors one by one. 212 empty. 213 empty. 214 was supposed to be empty too. The room had been closed for maintenance after some water leak from the ceiling earlier that week. There wasn't even a patient assigned there anymore. But when I walked past the door, I noticed light underneath it. Not bright light, just enough to see a pale glow across the floor. I stopped immediately. I remember staring at it for maybe 5 seconds before knocking softly on the door. No answer. I tried the handle and realized the room was unlocked. The second I stepped inside, the smell hit me first. Not blood, not chemicals. Just that heavy, sterile smell hospitals have mixed with something damp underneath it. Like wet fabric that had been sitting too long in a closed room. The TV was on. Static filled the screen at low volume, while the room itself stayed completely empty. No patient, no nurse. No equipment running except the heart monitor beside the bed. And that was the part that bothered me, because the monitor was connected to nothing. Still, the screen showed a pulse moving slowly across the line. Beep, pause, beep. I walked closer thinking maybe someone forgot to shut the machine off after transferring equipment. But the closer I got to the bed, the colder the room felt. I could actually see my breath for a second near the foot of the mattress. Then the monitor flatlined. One long, continuous tone filled the room. I jumped hard enough that my flashlight slipped from my hand and hit the floor. The sound echoed through the walls louder than it should have. Then everything went silent again. The monitor shut off by itself. So did the television. The entire room went dark, except for the hallway light behind me. I picked up the flashlight and backed toward the door without turning around. I kept expecting someone to walk in and explain everything. A nurse, maintenance, anybody. Then I noticed the bathroom door inside the room was slightly open. I was sure it had been closed earlier. The darkness inside that bathroom looked wrong somehow. Too deep. Like the room behind it was bigger than it should have been. And I heard breathing, very slow, very weak, coming from inside the bathroom. I called out asking if somebody was there. No response. Just breathing. I remember every hair on my arm standing up while I stepped closer to the door. The floor tiles felt freezing through my boots. I pushed the bathroom door open with my flashlight. Nobody inside, but the mirror above the sink was covered in condensation, thick enough that water dripped slowly into the basin underneath. Across the fogged glass, someone had dragged 5 words with their finger. She never left this floor. I stared at the mirror for maybe 2 seconds before the lights behind me shut off. The entire patient room went black. Not flickering, not dimming, just instant darkness. Then something moved beside the bed. I heard fabric slide across the mattress, slowly, like somebody sitting upright. I ran. I don't mean I backed away calmly or checked the hallway first. I ran straight out of room 214 and nearly slammed into one of the night nurses outside the station. She grabbed my arm, asking what happened. I remember trying to explain while looking back toward the hallway. The light under room 214 was gone. The nurse looked confused when I mentioned the room. Then she told me something I didn't hear from anyone else until that night. A woman had died in 214 months earlier during overnight recovery after surgery complications. According to hospital rumors, one of the nurses found her sitting upright in bed hours after time of death was already called. I asked the nurse if maintenance had been inside the room earlier that night. She said no. Then I asked who turned the TV and monitor on. She didn't answer me immediately. Instead, she looked down the hallway toward 214 for a few seconds before quietly saying something I still think about sometimes. That room's alarms still go off after 2 in the morning. I finished my shift that night sitting in the security office, pretending to watch the monitors. Around 4:17 a.m., the motion detector for Hall C triggered again. And on the screen outside room 214, there was someone standing perfectly still beside the door. A woman in a hospital gown, facing directly toward the camera. Some hospital workers will tell you the quietest floors are always the worst ones. Not because something happens there every night, but because eventually, everyone working those halls starts noticing the same things. The motion alarms, empty rooms with TVs turning on by themselves, patients appearing on cameras after they've already been discharged. But here's the part I can't stop thinking about. If room 214 was really empty that night, who wrote on the mirror after the lights went out? And why did the motion detector only activate after 2 in the morning? Because if something was still standing in that room at 4:17 a.m., it means the security cameras weren't malfunctioning at all. Leave your comments about this story, and if you liked it, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Let's continue. I worked overnight security at St. Vincent Memorial for almost 3 years before this happened. The hospital sat outside Columbus, near a wooded area off the interstate, and at night the place felt isolated in a way daytime visitors would never understand. During visiting hours, hospitals feel crowded and alive. At 3 in the morning, they feel abandoned. The elevators move slower, the lights hum louder. Even the hallways seem longer when nobody's walking through them. My usual patrol included the emergency room, parking structure, loading dock, and the old pediatric wing on the 3rd floor. The pediatric unit had technically been shut down months earlier because the hospital was renovating another part of the building. Most of the rooms were empty, at least they were supposed to be. The 3rd floor always made me uncomfortable for reasons I couldn't explain properly. The wallpaper still had faded cartoon animals running along the walls, but half the lights stayed turned off to save electricity. Some nights, the entire hallway looked gray instead of white. You'd walk past smiling painted giraffes while hearing air vents rattle through empty patient rooms. That alone was enough to make the place feel wrong. Around 1:40 a.m. one Saturday night, I got a call from the nurse supervisor downstairs. She sounded irritated, more than scared. Motion alarms in the pediatric wing had triggered 4 times in under 20 minutes. At first, I assumed maintenance workers forgot to sign out properly. That happens sometimes during renovations. But when I checked the camera feed in the security office, the hallway looked empty, except for one thing. Room 312 was open. I remember staring at the monitor because I knew for a fact every room upstairs was supposed to stay locked. Maintenance had sealed most of them off while replacing ceiling panels and electrical wiring. But on the monitor, the door to 312 was halfway open. The lights inside were off. I took the elevator up thinking I'd probably find a contractor sleeping somewhere he shouldn't be. The elevator doors opened onto complete silence. Not hospital silence, real silence, no voices, no wheels moving across tile, no TVs, just fluorescent buzzing overhead. The pediatric hallway stretched ahead of me, dim and empty. Half the ceiling lights were turned off, leaving long sections of shadow between the brighter spots. The cartoon murals looked almost dirty in the dark, and room 312 was definitely open. I walked slowly toward it while checking the surrounding rooms first. Every other door was locked exactly how it should have been. Plastic sheets covered some of the entrances from renovation work, moving slightly whenever the air conditioning kicked on. But the closer I got to 312, the colder the hallway felt. I remember actually rubbing my hands together because my fingers suddenly felt numb. When I reached the doorway, I stopped completely. There was someone sitting inside the room. Small figure, sitting upright on the hospital bed. At first, I honestly thought it was a child patient somebody accidentally moved upstairs temporarily. The room was dark, except for moonlight coming through the window, so I couldn't see clearly. But I could see enough. The figure wasn't moving. I stepped inside and immediately noticed the room looked untouched. No active equipment, no paperwork, no personal belongings. Dust covered parts of the floor near the walls, where construction hadn't been finished yet. The figure on the bed still hadn't moved. I called out asking if someone needed help. Nothing. Then I noticed the bed rails were still raised. The figure sitting there looked too small to be an adult. Thin shoulders, hospital gown hanging loosely, head tilted slightly downward. I took another step forward, and the hallway lights behind me shut off. Half the corridor outside went dark instantly. I froze. The only light left came through the room window now, casting pale blue shadows across the bed. I could hear my own breathing inside the room, while the fluorescent lights outside buzzed weakly somewhere farther down the hall. Then I realized something else. I couldn't hear the child breathing, not even slightly. I swept my flashlight upward toward the bed. Nobody was there. The mattress was empty. I stumbled backwards so hard I hit the supply cart beside the wall. Metal trays crashed onto the floor, loud enough to echo down the hallway. My flashlight beam shook across the room while I searched every corner again. Nothing, but the bed indentation was still there. Something had been sitting on that mattress seconds earlier. Then I heard running footsteps above me. Fast, small footsteps, directly overhead on the 4th floor. That made no sense because the 4th floor above Pediatrics was completely closed for asbestos removal. Nobody had access overnight except authorized contractors during daytime hours. The footsteps kept moving overhead, back and forth, like children running across a hallway. I radioed downstairs, asking if anyone else was on upper floors. Dispatch answered, immediately saying no. While I was still holding the radio, the footsteps stopped all at once. Then a child laughed somewhere nearby. Not loud, just soft enough to sound almost distant, but definitely inside the pediatric wing. I remember my stomach dropping instantly because the laugh sounded close, much closer than the footsteps had been. I backed out into the hallway and swept the flashlight around again. Empty corridor, empty nurse's station, dark rooms lining both sides, and one of the motion sensor toys activated by itself near the playroom entrance. A plastic toy piano started playing slow children's music in the dark. Single notes, soft and uneven. I pointed my flashlight toward the playroom and saw movement pass behind the glass window beside the door. Small shadow, quick, like a child running past. I moved toward it before my brain could fully process what I was doing. The playroom door was locked. I checked it twice. Still, inside the dark room, one of the battery-powered toys started making noise again. Then another. Little bursts of electronic music echoed softly behind the glass, while my flashlight reflected back at me. And then I saw someone standing inside, small figure near the back wall. Facing me, the flashlight couldn't fully reach that far into the room, but I could see enough to know the figure was wearing a hospital gown. I radioed downstairs again, asking for another guard to come up immediately. My voice sounded shaky enough that dispatch stopped asking questions and just said help was coming. Then the figure inside the playroom moved, not running, not walking. It slowly tilted its head sideways toward me. That was the exact moment every toy inside the room stopped making noise together. Complete silence. Then all the hallway lights came back on, bright enough to hurt my eyes for a second. The playroom was empty. No figure, no movement, nothing except overturned chairs and old toys covered in plastic sheets. 5 minutes later, another guard arrived upstairs with me. We searched the entire pediatric wing together. Every room was empty, every window locked. No signs anyone had been there. I didn't tell him everything I saw because even saying it out loud sounded ridiculous. But before we left the floor, he stopped near room 312 and looked down at the tile quietly. Then he asked me something I still think about. Why are there wet footprints beside the bed? I looked down. Small barefoot footprints crossed the floor from the empty hospital bed toward the hallway. But none of them led into the room, only out. Hospitals spend millions on cameras, locked doors, motion sensors, and overnight security. But after hearing enough stories from night guards, you start wondering if those systems were designed to keep people out, or keep something else contained inside. Because think about it for a second. If the pediatric wing had been shut down for months, who opened room 312? Who was running above the ceiling after midnight? And why did the footprints only lead away from the bed instead of toward it? But honestly, the part that would stay with me the longest isn't the laughing or the dark hallway. It's the idea that something inside that hospital already knew the guards would eventually come upstairs to look for it. I worked overnight security at St. Mercy Hospital in Western Pennsylvania for less than a year before I quit. Most people imagine hospital security as sitting behind monitors drinking coffee all night, but the job was mostly walking empty halls while everyone else in the building tried to stay awake. Hospitals feel completely different after 2 in the morning. During the day, they're loud. Nurses talking, phones ringing, families moving through the waiting rooms. But late at night, the entire building changes. You start hearing things you normally wouldn't notice. Ventilation systems humming behind walls, distant elevator bells, wheelchairs squeaking somewhere down dark corridors. And eventually, you begin realizing some floors feel wrong for no clear reason. The oldest section of St. Mercy sat underground beneath the surgical wing. Sublevel A held laundry and storage rooms. Sublevel B contained maintenance tunnels, refrigeration units, and the morgue. Nobody liked going down there alone. Even employees who had worked at the hospital for years avoided those elevators at night. The lights flickered constantly, and parts of the hallway still looked untouched since the early 1990s. Old tile walls, rust around door hinges, long corridors that seemed darker than they should have been. Around 3:12 a.m. one Thursday, I got a call from one of the ICU nurses. She sounded irritated, more than frightened. One of the south elevators kept arriving on random floors with nobody inside. At first, that didn't seem unusual. The hospital elevators constantly malfunctioned, but she said something else that caught my attention. No matter where it stops, she said, it keeps going back downstairs afterward. I checked the security monitors in the office before heading out. The elevator camera showed exactly what she described. 3rd floor. Doors open, nobody inside. Doors close. Then the elevator immediately descends again. A minute later, it opened near the emergency department. Empty again, then back downstairs. The strange part was where it kept returning. Sublevel B. Every single time. I remember sitting there watching the monitor for nearly 5 minutes while the elevator repeated the same pattern over and over. Empty ride up. Empty ride down. Sometimes it stayed downstairs for several minutes before moving again, like somebody was calling it from below. Finally, I grabbed my flashlight and headed over myself. The hallway near the elevator was completely empty when I arrived. Soft fluorescent lights reflected off the polished floor, while one of the vending machines buzzed nearby. The elevator doors opened immediately when I pressed the button. Nobody inside. I stepped in alone and hit the button for Sublevel B. The ride down felt unusually slow. Hospitals are strange places because you become hyper-aware of tiny sounds at night. Standing inside that elevator, I could hear the cables moving somewhere above me. Metal creaking softly inside the walls. The faint vibration beneath my boots as the car descended underground. Then the lights flickered once, just for half a second. The elevator kept moving. Floor numbers lit up slowly. Ground, Sublevel A. Then the car jerked hard enough that I grabbed the railing beside me. The elevator stopped, but the display still hadn't reached Sublevel B yet. For a second, nothing happened. Then the doors began sliding open halfway before suddenly freezing in place. Darkness waited outside. Not dim lighting, total darkness. I couldn't even see the opposite wall. At first, I assumed the power was out in the lower hallway, but something about it immediately felt wrong. Hospitals always have emergency lighting somewhere. Exit signs, backup generators, reflection from nearby rooms. There was nothing outside those doors, just black space. The elevator hummed quietly around me while I stared into it. Then I heard something moving out there. Metal wheels rolling slowly across tile. The sound echoed faintly through the darkness, somewhere beyond the doorway. Not close enough to see, just distant enough that my brain kept trying to picture what was making it. The wheels stopped. Silence filled the opening again. I remember reaching forward and hitting the close door button several times. Nothing happened. The doors remained frozen halfway open, while the elevator lights buzzed weakly overhead. Then I heard breathing, very soft. Close to the doorway now, the kind of weak, uneven breathing you hear from exhausted patients hooked to oxygen. I froze completely. Every instinct told me somebody was standing just outside the elevator, where I couldn't see them. I pointed my flashlight toward the gap, but the beam barely reached into the darkness before disappearing. And then somebody whispered my name, quiet, calm, close enough that it sounded like they were leaning directly beside the opening. I slammed the close door button repeatedly while backing against the rear wall of the elevator. My chest felt tight enough that I could barely breathe myself. Finally, the doors jolted violently and slammed shut. The elevator immediately started moving upward again. The lights flickered twice during the ascent. I kept staring at the doors, expecting them to open again, before reaching the main floor. When they finally opened near the lobby, I stepped out so fast I nearly collided with one of the overnight janitors pushing a supply cart. He looked at me for maybe 2 seconds before asking, "Did it stop again?" That word bothered me immediately. Again, I asked him what he meant. The janitor stayed quiet for a moment before leaning against the cart. He looked older, probably late 60s, and had worked there longer than most employees in the building. Then he asked me something that made my stomach drop. Did the doors open before Sublevel B? I asked how he knew that. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced toward the elevator behind me while lowering his voice slightly. "That elevator used to reach another floor years ago," he said. According to him, decades earlier, the hospital had another underground section beneath the morgue. Old storage tunnels, .M refrigeration rooms. Temporary body holding areas from before the building was renovated. Most of it was supposedly sealed off after flooding damage sometime in the late 80s. Supposedly. I laughed nervously and asked if he actually believed there was still a floor down there. The janitor never laughed back. Instead, he quietly said something I still think about sometimes. Sometimes the elevator still does. Near sunrise, before leaving my shift, I checked the elevator camera recordings one last time. Every clip from earlier that night glitched the exact moment the doors opened below ground. Static, black screen, then normal footage again, except for the final recording. For less than a second between bursts of static, the camera captured part of the hallway outside the elevator. Old yellow tile walls, dark corridor, and someone standing directly outside the doors, motionless, waiting for them to open. Most hospital workers are afraid of the morgue. But after hearing enough overnight security stories, you realize the morgue usually isn't the problem. It's the places underneath it. Because think about what happened for a second. The elevator stopped before reaching Sublevel B. The doors opened onto a floor the hospital claimed no longer existed. And somehow, whatever was standing out there already knew his name. But the part that really stays with me isn't the whispering in the dark. It's the idea that the elevator kept returning down there all night long, even when nobody inside the hospital was calling it. And after hearing stories like these, you start understanding why so many overnight hospital guards eventually quit without giving a real explanation. Because hospitals are full of places the public never sees. Empty wings, locked floors, underground hallways, rooms that stay dark for years, while motion alarms still trigger in the middle of the night. But tonight's stories leave a few questions that still don't make sense. Who was standing inside room 214 after the patient had already died months earlier? Why did barefoot footprints lead away from the bed in a pediatric wing that had been empty for months? And if the hospital sealed that underground level decades ago, who kept calling the elevator back down there all night? If you enjoyed tonight's stories, there are 2 more videos waiting for you on the final screen. One contains true truck stop encounters from drivers who realized they weren't alone on the highway, and the other follows night shift workers who heard things moving through places that should have been completely empty. Watch one of them before you turn the lights off tonight, because some places don't stay quiet after midnight. They just wait for fewer people to be awake.